And then I'm going to share my, share my screen. All right. Hi, everyone. I got to get to the first bit here. So this is day 2 of the Crush the Narcissist, Reclaim You 1-week challenge. And thank you again so much for being here. And you should thank yourselves and give yourself a big, huge pat on the back for showing up. Because even for me, it's 9 o'clock in Colorado and it's a little bit early. So just briefly, for those of you that were here yesterday, you know this, but I'll just introduce myself again. My name is Alyssa Nager, and I am the best-selling author of Crushing Fleas, which is a step-by-step guide to reclaiming peace, self-love, and the amazing you after an emotionally abusive relationship. I am also a life coach and a digital strategist, and I'm also the VP of marketing. I am a mother and a wife, and I am a survivor. So I wear many, many hats. What I know as a survivor, recovery is a lifelong practice. And in order to recover from an abusive relationship, we all need to adopt a growth mindset, because as we spoke about yesterday, it takes training your brain, retraining your brain. So you're training your mind, your body, and your soul, because trauma lives not just in your mind. Talk therapy is very helpful, but it actually changes you at a cellular level. So you must reclaim you. And everything we talk about here is about taking back your power and retraining your brain. So we talked about fleas yesterday, and really what we want to do is exterminate the flea from our life, right? In order to do that, we need to remember who we are, and as I said, reclaim our own power. So this is what we covered yesterday, just in case you missed it. We talked about what a narcissist, sociopath, or psychopath looks like, who is vulnerable to fleas, how do you know if you have fleas, why they are so hard to get rid of, and sort of the abuse cycle and addiction around the abuse cycle, not just the emotional addiction, but the actual physical addiction that happens with the cortisol, endorphin reaction that goes on in your body, and the power of words. And I think we talked about, I spent years trying to figure out how this actually happened to me. And ultimately, what I discovered is abusers train your brain, body, and mind with their words. So what do we need to do? We need to get our power back, and we need to retrain our mind, body, and soul back to ourselves. So today we're going to start with how you actually do that. And we have some guests coming this week that are also going to talk about a number of tools and modalities for retraining your brain and your mind and your body. But today we're going to talk about starting where you are, changing the story, how it takes practice, practice, practice. And that's kind of the fun part of it if you start to think about it as a game. Recreating boundaries with the flea, and how you actually kick anxiety to the curb. So first, let's talk about starting where you are. So this is one of my favorite quotes, and it's actually in the book that I've written called Crushing Fleas. But this is a quote by Pema Chodron, and she is a Buddhist nun, and she wrote a book called Start Where You Are. And the quote is, and I'm going to read this one, we already have everything we need. There is no reason for self-improvement. All of these trips that we lay on ourselves, the heavy-duty fearing that we're bad and hoping that we're good, the identities that we so dearly cling to, the rage, the jealousy, and addictions of all kinds never touch our basic wealth. They are all clouds that temporarily block the sun. But all the time, our warmth and brilliance are right here. This is who we really are. So I want to sit there with that thought for a minute. And if we can all close our eyes, I'd like us to just take a really deep breath and put your feet on the ground, feel the ground beneath you, and sort of let go of all those stories, all those self-limiting beliefs and the rage, and just sort of peel that all away and use your breath and just connect to your soul. And just think about how wonderful it is, just you. And we'll take one more deep breath and breathe out. And open your eyes. Can you feel that? You know, actually who you are, your soul. And that's what we're trying to reconnect to. So we talked about training your brain, and the first step in retraining your brain is changing the story. So your abuser, my abuser, created within our minds so many self-limiting beliefs, so many stories about who we are, that the flea repeated over and over to us and trained our brain to believe it. So stories like, and this is my favorite one, you're crazy. I mean, how many times were you told you're crazy? We've all heard this. And the story, the fact is, you are. I is a fact. But the story is, am crazy. This is a story created by your flea. And we talked a lot about words yesterday, but we can actually affect our stories. And one of the stories you could tell yourself is, I am amazing. So we talk about that in the book, Reclaiming the Amazing You. Muhammad Ali told himself and the world, I am the greatest. And he trained his body and his mind to believe it. So stories are incredibly important, and they take a lot of practice to change them. And the importance around changing stories, if you believe in energy and the law of attraction, here's the law of attraction. And this is how Jack Canfield, the author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul book, states it. But the law of attraction states that you will attract into your life, whether wanted or unwanted, whatever you give your energy to. So if you're always thinking, I'm crazy, I don't belong here, I don't have friends, or if you're always being told this, this is what you're attracting into your life. And I'm truly a firm believer in the law of attraction. My particular story was, one of the biggest ones was, I don't deserve a place at the table. So I don't know about you, but after I left the flea, I felt like an alien basically everywhere I went. I think about reaching out, making friends, connecting with community, all these things, but I couldn't figure out how I belonged. So what I decided to do was I decided to practice belonging, and I practice it a lot. And what I mean by this is I would, for example, schedule an event like going to the golf club with, girlfriends or acquaintances that I knew, and I would, organize it. And these things truly terrified me. And I would show up at the golf club, and I would literally probably not say much the entire golf game. But I kept on repeating in my mind, I belong. I actually belong here. I belong, I belong, I belong. And I kept practicing, and then I would schedule another event and I would show up. Sometimes I would carry around little crystals in my pocket. I also believe in crystals and the energy of these rocks, but this is a really big one. This is actually a smoky quartz. But dark crystals are very grounding, and I'd carry them in my pockets and I'd rub the crystals and I would say to myself, I belong here. And over time, I actually started talking at these events, to people, like saying hello and all these basic things that most normal people do. And I realized, over time that I was likable, even lovable. And so, back to the power of words and stories. We really need to practice letting go of stories and changing them for ourselves. And I'm sure, just sitting here, it might feel overwhelming. You might start to think of all these stories this abusive person told you. And in the book, we talk a lot about letting go of them. So you're not crazy. You deserve a place at the table. You can hold a job. Even practicing job interviewing, before you show up to a job interview. Practicing how you hold your body, instead of closing up, practicing being open. And we'll talk a lot about that when we get Amy Baker here, who God knows so much about sort of the mind-body connection and, how you actually change, your mind, your body, and your soul. And it all takes practice. The second thing I want to talk about in terms of gaining your power back is creating boundaries. We've talked about the fact that, narcissists, psychopaths, sociopaths are terrible at boundaries. They're very good at placing them on you. So, can't see your friends, can't go out, giving you an allowance, all these things are them placing these crazy boundaries on you and controlling you. But they're not good at boundaries themselves. So even though, you're not allowed to talk to their friends, they're busy flirting with your friends. So one of the steps in regaining your power is creating boundaries with the flea. And what you can certainly expect when you do that is major tantrums. And if you've ever tried it and tested it out, this can be as simple as, saying to the narcissist in your life, I would appreciate you not speaking to me that way. I love you. I want us to be able to work together, but you can't speak to me that way. So that's a small boundary. And a much bigger boundary that you may or may not heard of is called no contact. Now, if you have children with a flea, no contact looks a little bit different. If you don't have children, you can implement no contact. Now, if we go back to the idea that fleas are driven by narcissistic supply, and that's positive and negative attention, right? Any kind of attention, and sometimes negative for the flea is better. You can imagine what a mega boundary is for no contact is for a flea. So if you start to, instead of responding to the flea with, anger and all their, incredibly sort of ragey texts and emails and things like that, I'm sure you've seen. What if you gained your power back by simply just responding yes or no, or thank you very much, or please pick up the kids at 12? This drives a flea mad. And they will just absolutely go ballistic at first, but eventually this is a huge way to gain your power back. Here's a quote from H.D. Tutor, who is a self-proclaimed malignant narcissist. And if you can stomach them, he's written several books which talk about no contact and things like that with a flea. But his quote is, "No contact is the only way to beat the narcissist and achieve freedom." Because he knows himself how powerful receiving narcissistic supply from you is. And with no contact, you're totally cutting off their supply. And as I said, if you have kids with a flea, this is, you need to go about this in a much different way. And this can be through highly detailed parenting agreements. So for example, the flea might say, you're picking up on the kids on Monday, and you're like, no, actually, my day to pick up is Sunday. And he's arguing for whatever reason, or she, for whatever reason, your pickup day is Monday. You simply copy and paste the statement in the parenting agreement, blah, 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 so-and-so's pickup is on Sunday, without any other commentary that you send in an email. Another way to do this with kids, besides a super detailed parenting agreement, which I highly, highly recommend you do, and we have, I speak a lot about this in the book and how you do that. But another way is, when you're responding to emails and things like that I mentioned, remove all emotion. And you will see it's going to be very hard for you at first, but you will see when you press send on that very simple yes or no email, how you will regain your power. So with fleas, it's very important to set up boundaries, especially, if you can't even fathom going no contact right away, setting up boundaries like, no, please don't speak to me that way. No, please don't come into my office, and doing all this boundary from a position for yourself of love. And this doesn't mean you love the flea, but it means that you love yourself enough to not carry around, that rage and anger. I don't know if you've heard of Joey Klein, but he is basically a coach. He's pretty famous. And he said once in a thing I went to with him was, our emotions only last for 60 seconds. And then we ourselves perpetuate our emotions through the stories we tell ourselves. So if we can just maybe let ourselves feel for 60 seconds, move through that emotion of anger and rage or whatever we're feeling at the time, and then let it go, we're going to get really good at writing much better emails. We're going to get really good at sort of letting go of victimhood, and which doesn't mean what happened to you didn't happen. It means that we free up our minds to think about ourselves and our amazing future. So these are all tips and tricks I go to, in much greater detail. And we only have time to cover them off at a high level here. But if you can work your way and practice your way towards no contact, that is, you're going to feel relief over time. And it's practice, practice, practice. And I can tell you, even now, 10 years later, and, with all the practice in the world and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars and gazillions of hours doing this, I still fall off the wagon. I do my best to practice no contact and boundaries. But, I am not always perfect. So sometimes I rage out at the narcissist in my life. But then you forgive yourself, and then you move on. And then you try to do it better the next time. The other thing I want to talk about is PTSD or CPSD. So after years and years of being in a relationship with a narcissist or a flea, your body, from that whole, love, hate, love cycle, and the cortisol, endorphin, feed you get into your body, the training your brain to always be on fire. And whenever I say that, I touch the back of my head, because that is the part of your brain, the 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 sort of monkey brain that's, always on fire. A lot of people come out of these relationships with extreme anxiety, and which is called CPTSD or PTSD. I mean, it's the same sort of reaction that you get when, you have even one-off traumas, like, going to war, or, seeing somebody be shot, or seeing a fire, or things like that. And I'm going to tell you my story about how I kicked anxiety to the curb. And all these tools that I'm giving you are about kicking anxiety to the curb. But you have to start somewhere. And for me, when I was recovering from this, I started out, seeing a therapist. That's the first thing that, people usually think of. Oh my gosh, I need to see a therapist, or a coach, or a life coach. And, that helps sort of talking through some of the issues that I faced. But I still was experiencing this extreme anxiety. And that's when I started looking into trauma, and, how it not only affects your brain, but it trains your brain. It trains the neural pathways in your brain, and it also trains your body. So at one point in time, I went to talk therapy, and I was recommended to go and investigate EDMR. And I was like, okay, I'll definitely go do that. And I'm forgetting the other name for this right now, but basically what this is you go and see a specialist, and they put these little electrodes on your brain, and they sort of take a map of what's going on in your brain, and how it's firing. And then you go to 1 to 10 sessions, and basically during these sessions you are watching like video games, you're watching movies, and you're playing tricks with your mind. So you're watching this video game, and you're basically trying to change things that are happening in the game while you're watching. And I thought this was interesting, and right, I've adopted a growth mindset, so I'm basically open to anything to stop this extreme anxiety that I'm living with 24/7. And I get to like the 6th or 7th session, and where I live is up in the mountains, and we have a lot of snow in the winter. And I can't tell you, there was everything that set me off. I basically lived in a state of anxiety 24/7, but then there were certain things that kind of sent me into a panic. And one of the things was driving in the snow. So I was at, my 7th session, and finished it up. I think they only last like 20 minutes. Got out into the car, and I'm like, gosh, does this stuff really work? Driving home, and it's dumping snow. It is dumping snow. And didn't think anything of it. Drove up into my driveway and got out of the car, and I realized I had just left my appointment, got in the car, drove all the way home, never thought twice about anything, felt totally relaxed, and opened the car. And I basically got out of the car, and all by myself, I was jumping up and down in the snow, because what I realized in that moment was that I am in control, that I control my body and my mind and my soul, not the flea. I am the one, it really was a physical feeling in my mind. Suddenly my brain had shifted. Now that didn't mean that my anxiety had totally disappeared. It just meant that I knew that I could practice my way out of the stories, out of the self-limiting beliefs, and I myself was going to kick my anxiety to the curb. So this is really what launched me into the idea that I am going to own my power. And I started implementing some of these practices, at an extreme level. Things like no contact, where I was gaining back my power. Things like practicing my old stories and self-limiting beliefs. So when these ideas would pop into my head, like I'm not good enough, I don't deserve a place at the table, I'm not very good at making friends, I'm not very good at my job, all these stories that were put in my head, just cut them off. Because if you can remember, we only have these emotions for 60 seconds, right? That's what our body does and our mind does. And it's up to us to stop it firing. Now, as I said, I am not perfect at this. And absolutely, I have bad days. For example, yesterday, I had a huge cat fight with the Zoom meeting. Sorry about all the emails. I meant to apologize at the beginning of this. But, it was like, oh my gosh, this is the first time I'm actually doing this in this format. And I'm having a fight with this computer program that isn't working out for me. And, I had to track back, sit down, do some breathing, and basically get my power back, because every time we let ourselves run like that, which we do because we're only human, we're actually letting go of our power. So the next few sessions, we are going to be working with some people who are amazing experts at the idea of mindfulness and the mind-body connection. And funnily enough, nutrition and exercise. And I really didn't think about nutrition and exercise as part of this whole picture till kind of much later in the game. Exercise, yes, sorry. Nutrition, no. But you'll find that as you sort of open your mind and you actually, we spend so much time focused on pleasing this individual, right? So there's no shame, or there is a reason why we haven't spent a lot of time in a different sort of growth mindset, because we were always focused on, how do we get in our home and walk on eggshells and protect ourselves and please this person, assuage this person and do all these things. There was no time for you. But now there is time for you. As soon as you start to shift your brain and basically focus, and this isn't about being selfish, this is about healing. And it's also about leading a healthy, happy life. So when we do things like think about, mindfulness, breathing, meditation, the mind-body connection, reaching out to community, things like that. This isn't a selfish exercise. This is actually how you get back to the healthier version of you. So I'm super excited that tomorrow we're going to have Simone here, and she's going to talk all about mindfulness and meditation. And she will also take us through a sort of mind-opening meditation to start to help you see what that looks like. We're going to be talking about the mind-body connection with Amy Baker. We'll do a lot of breathing, and she'll probably take you through, I think, a little bit of yoga. And that might just be sitting, obviously, because that's going to be really hard to do when we have you guys here, at your computer on screens. And when we talk about mindfulness and meditation, I'll talk about this tomorrow too, but there are lots and lots of free resources out there. So I will be pointing you to that as well. And then we're going to talk about community and how we actually go from being super isolated, practicing, as we spoke about earlier, practicing, opening up, reaching out, saying to ourselves, yes, we deserve to be here, We deserve a place at the table. And that part of that reaching out is actually reaching out to community. Now, I was never a big community person, because I was so focused on this one, relationship in my life and keeping my family together and everything else. But as I started to reach out, it really changed my world. So I want to thank you for coming today. This is my book, Crushing Fleas. You can get it on Amazon. And it goes into great detail about working with psychologists, working with lawyers, establishing really detailed agreements, parenting agreements, working on your finances, as well as sort of all the other things that we talked about today, changing the story, releasing yourself from anxiety, and that's totally under your control, and the details around that. And once again, the most important thing is starting exactly with where you are, with the amazing you that's just sitting right there, to be set free. So thank you so much for coming again today. I really appreciate your time. I will send out the recording this afternoon, God willing, if I can work all this technology stuff again. And please reach out to me with questions. If you have questions right now, please feel free to put them in the chat box, which I have just opened. I think you can send them to me privately too. So you should all have my email address now as well. And if there's no questions, we will see you tomorrow for Mindfulness with Simone. I appreciate it. And have a great day.